Amara Vance felt the cold seep through the floorboards. It was a damp, persistent cold, the kind that didn't just chill the skin but settled deep in the bones. It was the cold of a house that knew it was losing its warmth, its lifeblood, its fight against the inevitable decay that comes when money runs out. The single bulb hanging from a frayed wire in the kitchen flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that made the small space feel like a cavern of despair. She was tired. She was hungry. She was alone. On the chipped formica countertop lay 3 letters, their sharp corners and bold red text a daily assault on her spirit. One was from the bank, a final notice regarding the mortgage on this very house, her grandmother's house. The second was from the power company, promising a swift and dark conclusion to her dwindling supply of electricity. The third, and most recent, was from a law firm representing Sharp Development Group, offering a laughably small sum for her property, an amount that wouldn't even cover the debts, let alone provide a future. It called the offer generous and final. Amara traced the peeling paint on the windowsill with a slender finger. This house was all she had left of her grandmother, Eleanor. Eleanor, who had raised her, taught her, and loved her with a ferocity that had been a shield against the world. But Eleanor was gone now, taken by an illness that had consumed her slowly, painfully, and expensively. The medical bills had devoured every last cent of their savings, leaving Amara with nothing but memories and a mountain of debt. She worked at the Greasy Spoon Diner, a job that paid minimum wage and left her smelling of fried onions and stale coffee. She worked double shifts whenever she could get them, her feet aching, her back screaming, her smile plastered on for customers who rarely looked her in the eye. Every dollar she earned was a drop in an ocean of need. It went to interest payments, to a box of pasta, to a gallon of gas for the sputtering, rust-eaten car that sat dead in the driveway. Tonight's dinner was half a can of lukewarm soup. She ate it slowly, trying to trick her stomach into feeling full. She remembered her grandmother's cooking, the scent of baking bread and simmering stew that used to fill this kitchen with life and love. Now it smelled only of dust and worry. Have you ever felt a hunger so deep it becomes an ache in your soul? A longing not just for food, but for security, for comfort, for the simple peace of knowing you will be okay tomorrow. Amara lived with that hunger every single day. Yet, amidst the crushing weight of her circumstances, Amara held on to one thing: a promise. In her last lucid moments, Eleanor had pressed a small, ornate brass key into Amara's palm. Her grandmother's voice had been a reedy whisper, a thread of sound in the sterile quiet of the hospital room. "Find the box, my love," she had breathed. "In the backyard, by the old oak. It's our history, our truth. Don't let them bury it. Promise me." Amara had promised. She didn't know what was in the box. Eleanor had called it a box of memories, a collection that held the true history of their family. To Amara, it was the last tangible piece of her grandmother's will, a final quest. And so, every day, after her exhausting shifts at the diner, she would take the worn shovel from the rickety shed and she would dig. The backyard was a small, neglected square of earth, dominated by the gnarled branches of an ancient oak tree. The digging was hard. The ground was stubborn, packed tight and riddled with roots and rocks. Her hands, already calloused from work, were now blistered and raw. Her muscles cried out in protest, but she kept digging. Her neighbors thought she had lost her mind. They would watch from their windows, whispering. Mrs. Gable from next door had stopped her one afternoon, her face a mask of pity. "Dear, I know you're grieving," she'd said, "but this isn't healthy. People are starting to talk." Amara had just nodded, unable to explain the fierce, desperate hope that fueled her. The digging was more than a search. It was an act of faith. It was a refusal to surrender. The property itself was a relic. It was the last of the original small homes on a street that was rapidly being devoured by modernity. Sleek, minimalist houses were replacing the charming, worn-out bungalows. The gentrification was a slow-moving wave, and Amara's home was the last rock standing against the tide. The man behind that tide was Bartholomew Sharp. His face was on billboards all over the city, a portrait of smug success. Sharp Development, building tomorrow's luxury. His letters had started politely, then grown more aggressive. The offers were insults disguised as opportunities. He wanted her land to complete his grand vision. The pinnacle, a towering condominium complex that would cast a permanent shadow over the entire neighborhood. Her small house stood exactly where the grand entrance was supposed to be. She was a thorn in his side, a glitch in his master plan. Amara finished her soup and washed the bowl in the sink, using a trickle of cold water to conserve what she could. She looked out the window at the deepening twilight. The shovel was leaning against the back door, waiting for her. She felt a profound weariness, a temptation to just crawl into bed and let the world win. But then she felt the cold weight of the brass key on the string around her neck. A promise was a promise. She pulled on her worn-out boots, took a deep breath of the chilly air, and stepped outside to dig. The earth was waiting. The secret was waiting. And her grandmother's memory was waiting to be honored. The next morning, the sun rose with a mocking brightness, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air of her quiet house. Amara had slept poorly, her dreams filled with the rhythmic thud of a shovel hitting stubborn earth. She had dug for 2 hours last night, her small headlamp cutting a lonely beam through the darkness, until her arms had refused to lift the shovel one more time. She had found nothing but more dirt and more roots. She pulled on her diner uniform, the pink fabric faded and thin. It felt like a costume for a part she no longer had the energy to play. She looked at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. There were dark circles under her eyes, a permanent shadow of exhaustion. She was only 26, but she felt ancient, worn down by a life that had demanded too much, too soon. Before leaving for work, she allowed herself a small ritual. She sat at the wobbly kitchen table and opened a small, leather-bound journal. It was another gift from Eleanor. "Write down one thing you're grateful for every day," her grandmother had told her. "Even on the bad days, especially on the bad days. It keeps the darkness from swallowing you whole." Today the page was blank for a long time. Grateful? For what? For the eviction notice? For the empty cupboards? For the pitying stares of her neighbors? Her hand trembled as she held the pen. Then she thought of the key around her neck. She thought of her grandmother's love, a force so strong it reached across the veil of death to give her purpose. She wrote, "I am grateful for my promise." It was enough. The day at the diner was a blur of hurried orders, dirty dishes, and the constant, cloying smell of grease. A customer complained his coffee was cold and left without tipping. Another let his children smear ketchup all over the table. Amara cleaned it all up with a forced smile, her mind a million miles away, in her backyard, under the old oak tree. She was calculating. If she could just dig a little deeper, a little more to the left. Maybe she had misunderstood her grandmother's instructions. Her one bright spot was her friend and co-worker, Maria. Maria was a whirlwind of energy and fierce loyalty, a single mother who understood struggle better than anyone. During their short break, they shared a contraband muffin behind the dumpster. "You were out there again last night, weren't you?" Maria asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "I saw your light from my apartment. You're going to work yourself into the ground, Amara. Literally." "I have to, Maria," Amara said, her voice quiet. "I'm running out of time. Sharp's lawyers sent another letter." "That man is the devil," Maria muttered, breaking off a piece of muffin for Amara. "He's been sniffing around my building, too, offering people chump change to get out. Some are taking it. They're scared." Maria looked at her friend, her eyes full of genuine worry. Maybe you should think about it, honey. Fighting a man like that? It's like trying to stop a hurricane with a paper fan." The words stung, not because they were unkind, but because they were practical. They were sensible. And Amara's quest was anything but sensible. "I can't," she whispered. "It's not just a house." Maria sighed, placing a comforting hand on Amara's arm. "I know. Just be careful. Men like Sharp don't play fair. They don't see people like us. They only see obstacles." The warning echoed in Amara's ears as she walked home later that afternoon. The sky was a canvas of gray, threatening rain. As she turned onto her street, she saw it. A gleaming black sedan, so out of place it looked like a spaceship, was parked directly in front of her house. Standing beside it, looking at her dilapidated home with a look of utter disgust, was Bartholomew Sharp himself. He was exactly as he appeared on the billboards. Tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored gray suit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. He radiated an aura of immense wealth and untouchable power. He was flanked by two other men in suits, one holding a briefcase, the other looking around with the bored expression of a hired bodyguard. Amara's heart began to pound against her ribs. This was it. The hurricane had arrived on her doorstep. Her first instinct was to turn and run, to hide until he was gone. But then she thought of her grandmother. She thought of her promise. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and continued walking toward her home. Mr. Henderson, her elderly neighbor, was on his porch, anxiously trimming his rose bushes. He caught her eye and gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. It was a clear warning. Don't engage. Don't provoke him. It was the same advice Maria had given. The world was telling her to be small, to be quiet, to surrender. But as she got closer, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Sharp was pointing a polished shoe toward the backyard, toward the disturbed earth around the oak tree. He was laughing, a short barking sound devoid of any real humor. He was laughing at her hope, at her grief. In that moment, any thought of retreat vanished. This was her land. This was her home. This was her grandmother's legacy. She would not be laughed off of it. She quickened her pace, her knuckles white as she clutched the strap of her worn-out bag. She had no money, no power, no influence. All she had was a shovel, a key, and a promise. And she decided with a terrifying certainty that it would have to be enough. She walked straight toward the man who wanted to erase her. As Amara approached, Bartholomew Sharp turned his attention from the yard to her. His eyes, the color of ice, swept over her from head to toe. He took in her faded diner uniform, her scuffed shoes, the exhaustion etched onto her face. His lips curled into a sneer of pure, unadulterated contempt. It was not the look of a businessman assessing an asset. It was the look of a king inspecting a bug he was about to squash. "Well, well," he said, his voice a low, condescending drawl that carried easily in the quiet street. "The lady of the manor returns from her toil. I was just admiring your landscaping." He gestured with a flick of his wrist toward the mounds of dirt in her backyard. The two men beside him smirked in unison. Amara stopped a few feet away, her heart hammering. She said nothing, simply meeting his gaze. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her fear. "I am Bartholomew Sharp," he announced, as if she could possibly not know. "We've been corresponding. Though I must say, my letters have apparently not been clear enough." He took a step closer, invading her personal space. He smelled of expensive cologne and something else, something acrid and unpleasant. Arrogance. "Let me be perfectly clear then," he continued, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial, menacing tone. "I want this hovel. I want this patch of dirt, and I am going to get it. My offer of $10,000 is more than generous. It's charity. I'm offering you a chance to walk away from this embarrassment with something in your pocket." "The house is not for sale," Amara said. Her voice was steady, betraying none of the turmoil raging inside her. Sharp let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Not for sale? My dear girl, everything is for sale. It's just a matter of finding the right price. But in your case, there is no price. There is only my offer, and then there is eviction. Those are your choices." He gestured to the man with the briefcase. "My lawyer, Mr. Daniels, has the paperwork right here. You can sign, take the check, and be gone by the end of the week. Or you can be difficult. And I assure you, you will not enjoy what happens when you are difficult with me." "I'm not signing anything," Amara stated, standing her ground. Sharp's facade of civility cracked. His face darkened, the pleasantries melting away to reveal the raw ugliness beneath. "You are a fool," he spat, the words sharp as shards of glass. "A sentimental little fool living in a fantasy. What do you think you have here? A palace? It's a shack. It's rotting. It's worthless. Just like the people who live in it." The insult, so personal and so venomous, struck Amara like a physical blow. A few neighbors had drifted out onto their porches, drawn by the confrontation. They were watching, some with curiosity, some with sympathy, some with a cold detachment. She was on a stage, and the humiliation was just beginning. Sharp noticed the audience and seemed to relish it. He raised his voice, performing for the small crowd. "Look at this place. It's a blight on the neighborhood. And look at her." He pointed a long, accusatory finger at Amara. "She spends her days digging in the dirt like a filthy animal. What are you looking for back there, huh?" He didn't wait for an answer. He strode past her, his expensive shoes trampling the overgrown grass, and walked right up to the edge of the largest hole she had dug. He peered in, then looked back at her, a malicious glee dancing in his eyes. "Are you digging for treasure?" he mocked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Hoping to find some pirate gold to pay your bills? Is that the grand plan? Let me tell you something about people like you. You wait for handouts. You wait for miracles. You think the world owes you something. It owes you nothing. You get what you earn, and you have clearly earned nothing at all." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick money clip, peeling off a single $100 bill. He held it up between his thumb and forefinger. "Here," he sneered. "Is this what you're digging for? You want a handout? Here's a handout." And then he crumpled the bill into a ball and threw it into the dirt at her feet. A collective gasp went through the small group of onlookers. "Mr." Henderson looked like he was going to be sick. A woman across the street, one of the newer residents, stifled a laugh and raised her phone to record. The humiliation was absolute. It was a public branding, a declaration that she was less than nothing. Dirt to be thrown money at. Tears pricked at Amara's eyes, hot and sharp. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to dissolve into the ground. But then she saw her grandmother's face in her mind's eye. Don't let them bury your truth. The rage that had been simmering deep inside her finally boiled over. It was a cold, clean anger that burned away the fear and the shame. She did not look at the money on the ground. She looked directly at Bartholomew Sharp. "You can keep your money," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You should get off my property, now." Sharp was stunned by her defiance. He had expected tears, pleading, submission. Not this. "Your property?" he bellowed, his face turning a blotchy red. "For now, but not for long. You want to be difficult? Fine. Let's be difficult." He pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the city, code enforcement, public health. You've created a hazardous pit in your yard. It's a public nuisance. And you know what else?" He dialed a number with vicious stabs of his finger. "I think you're mentally unstable, a danger to yourself and the community. Maybe a nice long psychiatric evaluation is in order." He put the phone to his ear. "Yes, I'd like to report a public disturbance. A mentally unstable individual. Yes, 142 Oak Street." Amara stood frozen as he described her to the dispatcher as a vagrant, a lunatic, a threat. He was trying to have her arrested or committed. He was trying to erase her, to have her removed from her own home by force. The world began to spin. The faces of the neighbors blurred. The weight of it all. The debt, the grief, the exhaustion, and now this public crucifixion was finally too much. Her knees felt weak. She was going to fall. And it was then, at the absolute lowest point of her despair, that her shovel, which she had left lying by the edge of the hole, slid on the loose dirt. It fell into the pit with a dull thud, followed by a much sharper, much more promising sound. Clank. It was not the sound of a shovel hitting rock. It was the sound of metal hitting metal. Sharp was still on the phone, smirking triumphantly. "Yes, send an officer immediately. She's becoming agitated." He was painting her as the aggressor, the crazy black woman in a rage, a classic, ugly script, but Amara barely heard him. That sound. Clank. It cut through the fog of her humiliation like a lighthouse beam. Hope, fierce and sudden, surged through her. Ignoring Sharp, ignoring the staring neighbors, ignoring the impending arrival of the police, she slid down into the hole she had spent weeks digging. What in God's name is she doing now? Sharp exclaimed, lowering his phone. "She's completely lost it." On her hands and knees in the cool, dark earth, Amara frantically dug with her bare hands. The soil was loose here. Her fingers scraped against a hard, flat surface. It was metal. It was square. It was a box. Her heart felt like it was going to explode. It was real. Her grandmother hadn't been delusional. The promise wasn't a fantasy. It was real. "The police are on their way," Sharp shouted down at her. "You are in a world of trouble, little girl." She ignored him. With trembling fingers, she cleared the dirt from the top of the box. It was old, made of dark, tarnished steel, and there, right in the center, was a keyhole. An ornate, brass-lined keyhole. It was a perfect match for the key hanging around her neck. With a surge of adrenaline, she heaved the box upwards. It was heavy, far heavier than she expected. She scrambled out of the hole, dragging it with her, collapsing onto the grass, her clothes and skin caked in mud. She looked like a creature born from the earth, wild and desperate. She pulled the key from around her neck. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely fit it into the lock. "What is that?" Sharp demanded, taking an involuntary step back. "What pathetic secret are you about to reveal? Your family's collection of bottle caps?" The key turned. With a rusty groan, the lock clicked open. Just as Amara placed her hands on the lid to open it, the wail of a siren cut through the air, growing closer and closer. A police car, lights flashing, screeched to a halt in front of the house. Two officers got out, their hands resting cautiously on their belts. "That's her, officers!" Sharp yelled, pointing. "The unstable one I told you about! She's been threatening me! Look at the state of her!" The officers approached cautiously, their faces grim. "Ma'am," the taller one said, his voice firm but not yet aggressive. "We've had a complaint. I need you to step away from the box." Amara looked from the officers to Sharp's triumphant face, and then down at the box in her lap. This was the moment. Her last chance. With the last of her strength, she lifted the heavy lid. The contents were not what anyone would have expected. There was no gold, no jewels, no cash. The box was filled to the brim with old, leather-bound books. They were ledgers, their pages filled with elegant, spidery script. On top of the ledgers lay a thick, yellowed envelope sealed with wax. On its face, in the same elegant hand, was written a name. Mr. Marcus Thorne, Esquire. Sharp peered over, a look of confusion replacing his smirk. "What is that? Old books? That's your treasure? That's what this has all been about?" He let out a booming, derisive laugh. "You destroyed your yard and got yourself arrested for a box of worthless old paper. You are even more pathetic than I imagined." The officers exchanged a look, clearly unsure how to proceed. A woman digging up old books wasn't exactly a criminal mastermind. "Ma'am, what's in the books?" the first officer asked, a hint of curiosity in his voice. Before Amara could answer, another vehicle pulled up to the curb. It was not a police car or a news van. It was a vintage, immaculately restored Lincoln Continental, the color of midnight blue. It purred to a stop with a quiet confidence that made the police cruiser look brutish and clumsy. The driver's side door opened, and a man emerged. He was elderly, but he moved with a grace and purpose that defied his age. He was a black man, tall and dignified, wearing a perfectly tailored three-piece suit. His silver hair was cut short, and his eyes, behind a pair of distinguished spectacles, held a deep, quiet intelligence. He surveyed the scene. The police, the gawking neighbors, Sharp's sneering face, and finally, Amara, sitting in the dirt, clutching a dusty old box. He walked calmly toward the chaotic tableau, his polished leather shoes making no sound on the grass. He moved with an unhurried authority that immediately commanded attention. The officers turned toward him. Sharp scowled, annoyed by the interruption. The man stopped directly in front of Amara. He looked down at her, not with pity, but with a profound and gentle respect. Then he looked at the open box. His eyes widened slightly as he saw the ledgers and the envelope. "I believe," he said, his voice a rich, calm baritone that cut through the tension like a hot knife through butter, "that is for me." He gestured to the envelope with Amara's name on it. Sharp scoffed. "And who in the hell are you?" he demanded. "Her long-lost rich uncle? Get in line." The man turned his calm, unwavering gaze on Sharp. "My name is Marcus Thorne," he said simply. "I am a senior partner at the law firm of Thorne, Westbrook and Vance, and I am the executor of the estate of Henry Vance." The name Vance hung in the air. Amara looked up at him, confused. Vance was her name. Henry Vance was her great-great-grandfather. Thorne knelt down beside Amara, ignoring the dirt on his expensive trousers. "Miss Amara Vance?" he asked gently. She nodded, speechless. "Your grandmother, Eleanor, was a very wise woman," he said, his eyes kind. "She called me a few months ago. She told me the time was coming. She said you would find the box when you needed it most. She told me to be ready." He reached out and took the envelope from her trembling hands. "This is a farce," Sharp blustered, growing agitated. "A conspiracy! Officers, arrest this woman! And him! They're trespassing!" Marcus Thorne stood up, breaking the wax seal on the envelope with a practiced thumb. He pulled out a single folded sheet of paper and a much older, brittle document. He read the letter to himself first, his expression unchanging. Then he looked at Sharp. "Mr. Sharp," Thorne began, his voice taking on a new, harder edge, "you have been operating under a grave misunderstanding. You believe you have been purchasing property in this neighborhood. You have not." "What are you talking about?" Sharp snarled. "I have deeds, contracts. I own half this street." "No," Thorne said, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. "You have been purchasing lease agreements, 99-year leases to be precise. Leases that were granted by the original owner of this entire tract of land." He held up the brittle document from the envelope. "This is the original deed for the entire district, filed in 1924. The owner was a man named Henry Vance." He then gestured to the ledgers in the box. "And these," he said, his voice rising, "are the original trust documents. In 1925, Henry Vance, a visionary but a man who understood the nature of greed, placed this entire land tract into a family trust, the Vance Heritage Trust. The trust was set to dissolve and pass to his last living heir upon the 100th anniversary of its creation, or upon the opening of this box, whichever came later. The trust's centennial is next year." A deathly silence fell over the street. The neighbors stared, their mouths agape. The police officers looked utterly bewildered. Sharp's face had gone from red to a pasty, sickly white. That can't be," Sharp stammered, a sheen of sweat breaking out on his forehead. "That's impossible. It's a trick." "It is no trick," Thorne said, his voice like the tolling of a bell. "It is the law. Every contract you hold is with a tenant of the trust, not the owner of the land. They had no legal right to sell. Therefore, every purchase you have made is null and void." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Then he delivered the final, devastating blow. The trust's last living heir, its sole beneficiary, and as of the opening of this box, the new administrator and legal owner of this entire neighborhood, is Miss Amara Vance. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Amara stared at him, then at the box, then at the faces around her. It was too much to comprehend. Her, the owner, of everything? Sharp looked as if he had been struck by lightning. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. His knees seemed to buckle. The swagger, the arrogance, the power, it all evaporated in an instant, leaving behind a hollow, terrified shell of a man. He had built his empire on a foundation of sand, and the tide had just come in. "She," he finally choked out, pointing a shaking finger at Amara, who was still sitting in the dirt, "owns everything?" "Everything," Marcus Thorne confirmed, his voice cold as steel. "Including the very ground you are standing on. And I do believe," he added with the barest hint of a smile, "Miss Vance has already asked you to leave her property." The power dynamic had not just shifted. It had been completely, seismically, and irrevocably inverted. The king was a pauper, and the girl in the dirt was now the queen. The moments that followed were a surreal tableau of collapsing power and dawning truth. Bartholomew Sharp stood frozen, his face a grotesque mask of disbelief and horror. The $100 bill he had thrown at Amara's feet lay in the mud, a pathetic symbol of his now worthless authority. Just as Sharp seemed to regain some of his bluster, preparing to unleash a torrent of denials and threats, two more sleek, dark cars pulled up behind Marcus Thorne's Lincoln. Several people in sharp business suits emerged, carrying briefcases. They were Thorne's legal team, and they moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine. "That's a lie! A forgery!" Sharp finally roared, finding his voice. "You can't do this! I have millions invested. I have contracts." "You have worthless pieces of paper," a sharp-voiced woman from Thorne's team interjected. She opened her briefcase on the hood of the car. "We, on the other hand, have the original trust charter, cross-referenced with the city's archival records. We have affidavits from the descendants of the original leaseholders. We have everything." She produced a thick file. "And we also have this, Mr. Sharp, a preliminary injunction, signed by Judge Harrison this morning, freezing all assets of Sharp Development Group, pending a full investigation into your business practices." Sharp's jaw dropped. "What? On what grounds?" "On the grounds of systemic fraud, for starters," Marcus Thorne said, stepping forward again. "You see, Mr. Sharp, my firm has been quietly investigating you for months, ever since Eleanor Vance first contacted me. We know all about the intimidation tactics, the predatory lowball offers to elderly residents, the shell corporations you used to hide your acquisitions. You didn't just make a bad investment. You built an empire on criminal activity." The two police officers, who had been standing by looking increasingly uncomfortable, now seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. Their posture shifted from dealing with a public nuisance to witnessing a major white-collar crime takedown. "This is insane," Sharp whispered, looking wildly around as if searching for an escape route. He saw only the stone-faced lawyers, the watchful police, and the silent, staring faces of the neighbors, his audience. The same audience he had tried to impress with his cruelty just minutes before. "Furthermore," Thorne continued, his voice relentless, "the city's Historical Preservation Committee has been alerted. This entire district is now under consideration for landmark status as the Vance Historic Quarter, which would make any large-scale demolition, such as for your proposed Pinnacle condominium, impossible." Every word was another nail in Sharp's coffin. He wasn't just losing the property. His entire project, his entire legacy, was being dismantled before his eyes. It was at this point that Amara finally found her voice. She slowly, unsteadily, got to her feet. She was still covered in dirt and grime, her diner uniform stained, her hair a mess. But as she stood up, she seemed to grow in stature. The humiliation had been burned away, replaced by a quiet, unshakable dignity. She looked not at the lawyers or the police, but at the crowd of neighbors, her neighbors. Some who had pitied her, some who had mocked her, some who had feared her. "My grandmother," Amara began, her voice soft but clear, carrying in the stunned silence. "She always told me that people will try to bury who you are. They will try to make you forget your own story, your own history. They will call you worthless. They will tell you that you don't belong." She glanced at Sharp, whose face was now ashen. "They will throw money at your feet and expect you to be grateful for the insult. They think that their power gives them the right to decide your value." She took a deep breath, her gaze sweeping across the faces in the crowd. "She made me dig for this," Amara said, gesturing to the box. "Not for gold, not for treasure, for the truth. The truth is that my family built a home here. They laid the foundation of this community. This land isn't just dirt and money. It's our history. It's my family's home." She paused, and her next words were not for Sharp, but for everyone else. "And from this day forward, it will be a home for all of us, a place where no one has to be afraid of being pushed out, of being told they are worthless, a place where everyone belongs." As she finished speaking, a sound broke the silence. It was Mr. Henderson, her elderly neighbor. He was clapping. Slowly at first, then with more force. Then Maria, who had run over from her apartment when she heard the sirens, began to clap, tears streaming down her face. Soon, others joined in. The tentative applause grew into a wave of thunderous, cathartic sound, a roar of approval and relief that washed over the street. The woman who had been filming with a smirk now lowered her phone, her face flushed with shame. Sharp watched it all, his expression curdling into one of pure hatred. "You'll regret this," he snarled at Amara, his voice a venomous whisper. "All of you. I'll sue you into oblivion." "I don't think so," Marcus Thorne said grimly. As if on cue, a dark, unmarked van pulled up. Two grim-faced individuals in dark suits with FBI insignias on their jackets stepped out. They conferred briefly with Thorne, who handed them a file. The lead agent walked directly up to Sharp. "Bartholomew Sharp," he said, his voice flat and official. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, mail fraud, and violations of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act." "What? No!" Sharp yelped as the second agent pulled his hands behind his back. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound on the street. The man who had wielded power like a weapon was now powerless. The man who had tried to have Amara arrested was now being arrested himself. It was the purest form of ironic justice. As the agents led a sputtering, protesting Sharp to their van, he looked back at Amara one last time. His eyes were filled not with remorse, but with a baffled, impotent fury. How could this have happened? How could a girl in the dirt have defeated him? Amara simply met his gaze, her expression calm and steady. She didn't have to say a word. Her victory was complete. The crowd cheered as the van doors slammed shut and the vehicle pulled away, taking with it the man who had tried to tear their community apart. The hurricane had passed, and Amara Vance, against all odds, was still standing. The aftermath was a whirlwind of motion and emotion. As the FBI van disappeared down the street, the atmosphere on Oak Street transformed. The tension and fear evaporated, replaced by a sense of giddy disbelief and overwhelming relief. Neighbors who had been strangers moments before were now hugging and talking excitedly. Marcus Thorne gently guided Amara away from the crowd and toward his waiting Lincoln. "Let's get you inside, Miss Vance," he said kindly. "There is a great deal to discuss." Inside her own small, shabby house, the world began to feel real again. Thorne's legal team had set up a makeshift command center on her wobbly kitchen table, spreading out documents and laptops. Amara, in a daze, sat on one of her mismatched chairs as Thorne explained the full scope of her new reality. "The Vance Heritage Trust," he explained, "is valued, conservatively, at over $40 million. He slid a bank statement across the table. Amara looked at the number and felt her head spin. It was an impossible string of zeros. That includes the land value of this entire district, as well as significant investment portfolios established by your great-great-grandfather and managed by my firm for generations." She stared at the paper, unblinking. $40 million. Last night she had been rationing soup, and, as the sole administrator, Thorne continued, "you are entitled to a significant annual salary. We have taken the liberty of setting it at $500,000 per year, plus benefits. Is that acceptable?" Amara couldn't even form a word. She just nodded, her eyes wide. "Good," Thorne smiled. "First things first." He made a phone call. Within the hour, things began to happen. A man from the bank arrived, not with an eviction notice, but with a document confirming her mortgage had been paid in full. He stammered an apology for the harassment she had endured. Next, a flatbed tow truck arrived. But instead of hauling away her dead car, two mechanics got out, popped the hood, and began working on it right there in the driveway. An hour later, the engine roared to life for the first time in months. The lead mechanic handed her the keys. "All fixed, ma'am. Compliments of Mr. Thorne." Then came the trucks. The first was from a high-end furniture store. A team of movers began carefully removing her old, broken furniture and replacing it with beautiful, new pieces. They brought in a comfortable sofa, a solid wood dining table, a brand new bed with a thick plush mattress. Amara watched, tears welling in her eyes as they carried in a magnificent new armchair, and placed it in the exact spot where her grandmother's old, worn-out chair used to sit. Another truck arrived from an organic grocery store, filled to the brim with food. Workers stocked her new refrigerator and pantry with fresh fruit, vegetables, meat, bread, more food than she had seen in years. A third truck delivered boxes of new clothes, shoes, and household supplies. They even brought toys and books, which Thorne explained were for the community center she had spoken of. Her house, a symbol of her poverty and struggle, was being transformed, room by room, into a home of comfort and security. The flickering lights were replaced. The peeling paint was scheduled to be redone. The cold that had seeped into the very bones of the house was being driven out by the warmth of possibility. The news of Bartholomew Sharp's downfall was swift and brutal. It was the lead story on every local news channel. His mugshot, a picture of a defeated, humiliated man, was plastered everywhere. The reports detailed the extent of his fraud. His company, Sharp Development, collapsed overnight. His business partners deserted him. His wife filed for divorce, publicly denouncing him as a monster. He was facing a sentence of up to 30 years in federal prison. His ruin was as total as it was public. He had tried to crush Amara under the weight of his power, and in the end, his own power had crushed him. But the greatest reward for Amara was not financial or material. It was symbolic. A few weeks later, a ceremony was held on the street. The mayor was there, along with city council members and Marcus Thorne. They officially unveiled a new street sign. Oak Street was gone. In its place was Vance Way. They also held a groundbreaking ceremony for the new community project. Amara, standing at a podium, announced her plans. The land would not be used for luxury condos. It would become the Vance Community Collective. There would be beautiful, affordable housing for low-income families. There would be a public park and community gardens, and at its heart, there would be a large, modern building. She unveiled the artist's rendering to thunderous applause. The sign on the building read, "The Eleanor Vance Center for Community and Arts." Amara's life had been utterly and completely transformed. She went from a state of desperate survival to one of profound influence and benevolent power. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a philanthropist, a community leader, a protector. The girl who had been digging for her history was now in a position to build a future for hundreds of others. The weight of the world was no longer on her shoulders. Instead, she had been given the strength to lift others up. The vindication was overwhelming, a wave of joy and relief so powerful it felt like she could finally, truly breathe. 1 year later, the sun shone brightly on Vance Way. The street was alive. The old neglected houses had been lovingly restored, their porches adorned with flowers. The air, which once carried the tension of impending displacement, now hummed with the laughter of children playing in the newly opened park. At the center of it all stood the Eleanor Vance Center, a beautiful modern building of glass and warm wood. Inside, it was a hive of activity. There was a daycare for working parents, a library filled with books, a kitchen offering free, nutritious meals, and classrooms providing job training and art classes. Amara Vance walked through the halls, no longer in a faded diner uniform, but in a smart professional pantsuit. She was not, however, any less approachable. She knew everyone by name. She stopped to help a young boy with his drawing, praised a woman who had just completed a coding course, and shared a laugh with Mr. Henderson, who now volunteered every day in the community garden he had helped design. She was the head of the Vance Heritage Trust, a powerful and respected figure in the city. She sat on boards, negotiated with politicians, and managed a multi-million-dollar endowment. But her heart was still the same. Her kindness, forged in hardship, was now her greatest asset. She wielded her power not as a weapon, but as a tool to build, to heal, and to protect. The story of the girl who dug up her inheritance had gone viral. It had become a modern-day fable, a story of hope and justice that inspired millions. It led to tangible change. Several cities, inspired by her story and lobbied by Marcus Thorne's firm, passed new zoning regulations to protect historic communities from predatory developers. They were informally known as Vance's Law. Bartholomew Sharp was a distant memory. He had been convicted on all counts and was now serving a 25-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. His name became a cautionary tale, a synonym for the kind of arrogant greed that leads to self-destruction. Late one afternoon, Amara was driving home from a meeting at City Hall. Her car, the same one that had once sat rusting in her driveway, was now perfectly maintained and reliable. As she turned a corner a few miles from her neighborhood, she saw a young family on the side of the road. Their car had a flat tire, and the father was struggling with a rusty lug wrench, his face etched with frustration and worry. A woman stood by, holding a small child, looking close to tears. Amara saw in them a reflection of her former self. She saw the panic, the feeling of being one small disaster away from complete collapse. Without a moment's hesitation, she pulled her car over. She got out and approached them with a warm smile. "Having some trouble?" she asked gently. The man looked up, startled. "Yeah, flat tire, and this stupid wrench won't budge." "Let me help," Amara said. She didn't just offer advice. She called her roadside assistance service. While they waited, she talked to the family, learning they were new to the city and struggling to make ends meet. When the tow truck arrived and the tire was changed, Amara discreetly paid the driver for a full set of new tires for their car. She then handed the mother a card. "This is for the community center I run," she said. "We have job placement services, free childcare, and a great community. Please come by any time. We're here to help." The woman looked at the card, then at Amara, her eyes filling with grateful tears. Why are you doing this?" Amara smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. "Because a long time ago," she said, "someone taught me that the most valuable things aren't buried under the ground. They're the connections we build with each other." She got back in her car and drove away, leaving the stunned and grateful family behind. She had not done it for recognition or praise. She had done it because it was who she was. Her circumstances had changed, her power had grown, but her virtuous heart remained the same. She was still honoring her grandmother's truest lesson, that the best way to secure your own legacy is to help others build theirs. The cycle of kindness, she knew, was the only treasure that truly mattered, and she would spend the rest of her life making sure that cycle never ended. Have you ever considered that the greatest power is not the ability to command, but the capacity to care? Amara Vance had discovered that truth in the dirt of her own backyard, and now she was planting its seeds for a whole new generation to harvest.